So, when I left off yesterday, um, let's see. Really, there was just a lot of explaining about the water situation that was going on. Obviously, Hammer gets pretty upset when the Simses, especially, come for water and the disrespect that they deal with from them, and it's gotten so bad with the lack of water that even the Creek Rosalie is starting to not have much water. And it says folks couldn't drink that muddy water, but the cows could. So people would bring their cows down. And so that was another place where they would get water, at least for the animals. On the way to the creek, we met up with John Henry Barry. John Henry was the same age as Hammer, and the two were good friends. Hey there, John Henry, Hammer and I both said. John Henry Barry. Guys remember John Henry Barry? He's the one who died. He was one of the Barrys who was lit on fire in Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, and died. So now we find out he's a good friend with Cassie's Uncle Hammer, or David's brother Hammer. Hey, y'all, said John Henry, and gave his bony cow a swat to push her on. Y'all headed to the Rosalie? That's right, said Hammer. Then I'll walk along with you. Fine, said Hammer, and we kept on going. When we got down to the Rosalie, we found Charlie and Ed Rose along with Dewberry Wallace, a close friend of theirs, and Mr. Melbourne's boy George watering their cows. With them was Joe McAllister, a few years older than the other boys, and black. All together, they had some 7 cows, and here we come with our 15 plus John Henry's 1. It didn't look good. So they had 7 cows, and the Logan boys, along with John Henry, have 16. So they have a lot more cows, which just shows that if they can have more cows, then they probably have more money. They're better off. Hey there, Hammer, David, John Henry, cried Joe with his good nature. Hey, Joe, I returned. And Hammer and John Henry gave a nod. Charlie and Ed Rose and Dewberry gave us a mean look. George Melbourne moved his family's cows away from the others. Hammer and me, we headed our cows toward the water. John Henry and his cow came along. Now just hold it right there, ordered Dewberry. This is Dewberry Wallace from the Wallace store, remember? There ain't enough water here for all them cows. Charlie laughed. Don't tell me y'all inwards gotta come to the creek now to water your animals. Thought y'all had a pond for that. Yeah, we got a pond, answered Hammer. We got some 15 more cows, too, to water from that pond. Figured to water these here from the Rosalie. Yep, like everybody else. Figured to save that pond water for our other cows. So it's like he's pouring salt in the wound. It's like he's almost trying to brag, rub it in that they have more cows than the Wallaces. I stood there not saying a word, figuring though we was about to die. John Henry looked as if he was figuring the same. The white boys looked at each other, then Charlie spoke again. Y'all Logan's some mighty uppity inwards, you know that? Think y'all's good's white folks, 'cause y'all got a little land and some livestock. And don't forget, we got water too, said Hammer, rubbing salt into Charlie Sims's already festering soul. And that's a metaphor. rubbing salt into his already, because you know how if you rub salt into a wound, it would burn it. So rubbing salt in, on top of the wound already being there is just making it worse. So it's a figure of speech. Water y'all gotta come to us to get. Well, don't y'all go getting so prideful about that water, N-word. Maybe one day you won't have it. Maybe one day you'll find something dead floating in it. I thought my heart was going to burst. It was beating so fast and furious. I could see me and mine floating in that water. I was angry, too, that they were calling us by that word again. It was a galling word, an insulting word that made my blood boil. But a word I had to take because that was just the way white folks talk to us. Maybe some figured no insult by it, but to me it was always a stinging insult, and I stored that insult in my memory. So y'all N-words get, ordered Dewberry, saying that word again. Y'all ain't watering no N-word cows down in here today. Yeah, said Ed Rose. Go on and water 'em from that pond of y'all's. George Melbourne ain't said a thing. So this is one kid who's with them, who isn't being mean and who's, trying to kind of stand back a little bit. He and his father had been at the well earlier getting water, and they they don't treat the Logans the way that the Wallaces do. But Joe McAllister, bless his heart, he sure enough did. Now, just wait a minute, Mr. Ed Rose, he exclaimed. Them cows be needing water, and God ain't gonna smile on a body turned way his dumb creatures needing water. Ed Rose, Dewberry, George, and Charlie, too, all looked at Joe. Now, one thing about Joe McAllister was that he was what some folks would call not so bright. He had a good heart, though, and most folks cared about him. And even if they didn't, they put up with him. Joe was the kind of person who could speak his mind and folks wouldn't take offense. I suppose because folks figured whatever Joe had to say wasn't worth taking offense about. Now, you got to let him drink, Mr. Ed Rose, Joe went on, 'cause God, he done put this water here for everybody. And Joe, shut up, said Charlie. And Joe shut up. Then Charlie turned back to Hammer and me. Y'all get, he said. Yeah, said Dewberry. And get now, added Ed Rose, for we go and forget just how y'all supposed to be some of God's dumb creatures, too. Hammer didn't say anything back to any of them. He just looked at me, swatted one of the cows with his switch, and headed the cows upstream. John Henry, with his cow, came too. I looked back at the Simses, at Dewberry and George, and wondered if they would follow. They didn't. Once we were out of sight and hearing distance of them, John Henry stopped his cow and he said, You know you're crazy, don't you, Hammer? You're crazy to go talking to these white folks like that. Don't you know these white folks will kill you? Hammer looked at John Henry. I expect I do, he said. Then he moved on and headed the cow straight into the muddy waters of the Rosalie. John Henry Barry shook his head. Crazy, he muttered. Plain downright crazy. I stay with you. I stay friends with you. I hope I don't end up getting me hung. I looked at John Henry and knew how he was feeling. But Hammer was just Hammer, and I followed after him. So did John Henry. Huh. And it wasn't because of Hammer, right, that he ended up being killed in the end. I suspect the Simses and Dewberry Wallace knew once we were out of sight we watered our cows in the Rosalie. Once we were out of their sight that we watered our cows in the Rosalie, I expect they knew that, but they didn't come after us. I was nervous about watering the cows in that creek, and John Henry was too, but Hammer stayed his time, letting the cows drink their muddy fill. Then, after what seemed like an eternity to this David Logan, he finally turned the cows toward home. Later, that same week, Hammer and me were walking the road towards home when we seen a wagon hung over in a ditch with one of its wheels off. All the contents from that wagon were strewn over the ground, and Charlie Sims was in the ditch, knelt beside the wagon, looking all sick about the missing wheel. Then he seen us, and he hollered, "Y'all, get up here! Come give me a hand!" Hammer looked around. Hammer looked around, first one way and then the other, and then said, "You talking to us?" "Don't see no other N-word standing up here," countered Charlie. Hammer clenched his fists. I stepped forward. I wasn't intended to see us mixed into trouble about this. "I'll give you a hand," I said. Charlie Sims sneered at me. "What kind of help you gonna be? You here with that busted leg? I want that boy yonder to get under this wagon and push it up." I glanced back at Hammer, and I could see he was getting mighty vexed. "I can do it," I said. "Busted leg got nothing to do with my back." "David," Hammer snapped at me, "don't you do it. Don't you do it. I ain't gonna help you none." "I ain't asking you to," I snapped back. Now, I had my pride, just like Hammer did, but I knew if we didn't help Charlie out, the trouble that ran between us was just going to get worse. So I limped to the back of the wagon, laid down my crutch, and hefted the low end of the wagon, while Charlie tried to get the wheel back on. "Hurry up," I said, because that wagon was heavy. Charlie, though, seemed to be taking his time. "Don't rush me, boy. Get it on when I get it on." "I can't hold it much longer." He laughed. "Thought you was one that had such a good back." He seemed to be toying with the wheel, when all he had to do was slip it on the axle. I waited maybe a minute, maybe two, an eternity it seemed to me, and he still didn't have the wheel on. "I gotta let it go," I finally yelled out. "It's too heavy." "You do, and I'll..." The wagon slammed down, and old Charlie fell back with the wheel into the ditch. "I told you I couldn't hold it," I said, and reached for my crutch. Charlie rolled the wheel aside, scrambled up from the ditch, and before I could step aside, he laid his back hand across my jaw and knocked me down. That was the worst thing he could have done. Hammer, who hadn't lifted a finger to help me with the wagon, dashed across the road and tore into Charlie Sims, knocking him back into the ditch. Hammer fell on top of him and pounded at his face. Charlie finally was able to push him off and tried to climb back onto the road, but Hammer wasn't finished with him. He reached for his arm and turned him around. "Hammer!" I yelled. "Leave him be!" I attempted to pull myself up so I could try to stop Hammer, knowing all the while that when Hammer got this mad, there was no stopping him, for Hammer had a temper like a raging fire. There's a simile, a temper like a raging fire. But I kept yelling at him anyway to stop. He paid no attention to me. He hit Charlie one more time with an iron fist and laid him out flat. That time, though, Charlie didn't get up. He didn't move. "Get up," Hammer ordered. Charlie still didn't move. I said, "Get up, you no-count excuse for a snake. Get up." But Charlie just stayed there. I caught on to the back of the wagon and finally managed to pull myself to my feet. I limped over to the ditch and studied Charlie, then turned to Hammer. "Lord, Hammer," I said, "he done hit his head on that rock, and I think he's dead." Hammer stepped back and only now unclenched his fist. His face was showing no remorse at what he'd done. If he was scared, he wasn't showing that either. But I was sure enough scared, and I was ready to get out of there. I stared down at Charlie. "What we gonna do, Hammer? What we gonna do?" "This is Charlie Sims. What do we know about Charlie Sims 23 years later. We know that Charlie Sims did not die. However, David and Hammer don't know that. Hammer stared down at Charlie too and shrugged. Expect there's nothing we can do now, is there? I just looked at him and wondered how long it would be before we both got hung. After all, young as we were, we knew enough to know that black boys of any age didn't go around hitting white boys of any age. Black boy hit a white boy, black man hit a white man, he could get hung in a flick of a horse's tail. And that's just the way things were. I ain't hardly lying when I say this David Logan was mighty scared. It was just about then Halton came along. He hollered at us, not seeing Charlie lying there in the ditch. What y'all little scounds doing, he said, facing that grin of his until he came around the wagon and saw for himself what we were doing. He took one look and the smile was gone. Without even asking what had happened, he said, let's go, we got to get out of here. I asked him, what about Charlie? One of you done hit him? Yeah, I did, said Hammer, owning up to it without a bit of hesitating. No bragging in his words, no sorrow either, just fact. I did. Then there's no time for talking now. Come on, we got to get out of here, quick now. I hobbled around the wagon and started up the road. No, Halton said, through the woods. David, hold on to your crutch and get on my back. But do what I tell you, boy, we got to fly. I said nothing. Halton knelt down, and before I could climb on his back, he flung me onto it. Hold tight, he ordered, and took off with me across the road and into the woods on the other side. Halton, even with me on his back, ran like the wind through the pines. Ran like the wind. There's another simile. And Hammer was right behind. We said nothing all the way home. But all that long way, all I could think about was Charlie Sims was dead and that maybe soon Hammer would be too. I was more scared than I had ever been in my life. Not until we reached the back porch did Halton put me down. Mama came from the house, broom in her hand, took one look at us, and knew something was wrong. What is it? She demanded. Halton tried to catch his breath, but there wasn't time. Hammer done hit Charlie Sims. Yeah, and I'd hit him again. Mama's dark eyes went darker, and she stared at Hammer. You done what? He hit David, said Hammer sullenly, as if that was supposed to answer all her questions. He won't be hitting him again. He ain't moving, Aunt Callie, said Halton. I come long after Hammer done laid Charlie out. He ain't moving. He layin' in a ditch up there near the crossroads. Oh, dear Jesus, Mama said in a voice suddenly gone quiet. She looked out across the fields to the woods. She closed her eyes for several moments, as if she was praying. Then she opened them again. Did you check him, Halton? Halton shook his head. I ain't touched him. I just got David and Hammer, and we got out of there. He was quiet a moment, still breathing heavily. Then he added, Aunt Caroline, when I was coming up past the white folks' school, I seen the sheriff. Him being down in these parts, he'll most likely know soon. Mama bit her lip. Then she nodded, put the broom aside. All right, she said, as if making up her mind about something. Halton, you take Hammer and you hide him in the woods there, near your Uncle Paul Edward's praying rock. David, you come with me. What you gonna do, Aunt Caroline? Asked Halton. Gonna go check on that boy now. Y'all hurry. And Hammer, she took a firm hold of Hammer's shoulders. You mind what Halton tells you to do, you hear me? I hear. Now go on, both of you, and don't come back here till I sends for you. With that, Hammer and Halton dashed across the yard, past the smokehouse, past the garden, through the orchard, and across the pasture toward the woods and Papa's praying rock. Mama ran back inside the house to check on Ma Rachel, taking her afternoon nap. Then, with me trailing behind her fast as I could, she hurried across the side yard and around the barn to the barnyard and called for Raindrop, the mare that always pulls her buggy. But Mama didn't take the time to hitch Raindrop to the buggy this day. Instead, she simply bridled her, helped me up, then got on herself. and turned Raindrop towards the wooded path Halt and Hammer and I had just traveled. She said it was quicker than the road. When we reached the wagon, we didn't get down. Instead, we went around and looked over in the ditch. Charlie wasn't there. David, you sure this is where you said you left him? Mama asked. Yes, ma'am, right here. He hit his head on that rock yonder. Mama sighed. Well, he's not here now. You figure they done found him already? I expect. Well, then what we gonna do now, Mama? I asked. We go home and we wait. They'll be coming soon. She looked up and down the road into the woods on either side, then reining the horse around, gave Raindrop a click and a nudge, and we tore up the road towards home. When we got to the house, Joe McAllister was standing by the well with Mr. Tom B., a neighbor of ours. Hey, how do there, Miss Caroline? Greeted Joe. David, how you, boy? Mama reined in Raindrop and got down. She helped me to the ground, then turned towards the well. We was just waiting here for y'all to get back, said Mr. Tom B. We done knocked on the door, but ain't nobody answered. Figured it'd be all right with y'all if we go ahead and help ourselves to some water. But all of a sudden, Tom B. stopped his talking and looked close at Mama. Something wrong, Miss Caroline? Everything's wrong, answered Mama. Everything. What do you mean? Mama took a deep, deep breath. Hammer, my boy, Hammer, he done gone and hit that white boy Charlie Sims, knocked him out. He done hit his head on a rock, and we figured him to be dead. Dead? Cried Mr. Tom B. That's right, dead. David and me, we just gone to see about him, but he ain't even there where Hammer knocked him down. Suppose his family done found him already. Reckon they gonna come soon for my Hammer. Oh, Lord, how come my Paul Edward ain't here? They gonna come. Joe laughed. What you talking about, Miss Caroline? That Charlie Sims, he ain't dead. What? Boy, what are you saying? That's the truth, said Mr. Tom B. We just done seen that boy over there in front of the white folks' school. Seen him when we was on our way here, him and his brother. They was just standing up there talking to the sheriff. The sheriff, said Mama. Yes, ma'am, that's right. Sheriff and them, they was doing some talking, but we ain't stopped to jaw with them none. They was looking mighty serious, and, we ain't had no mind to go messing in white folks' business. Mama nodded. She closed her eyes and her lips moved, but no sound came out. Lordy, Miss Caroline, said Joe. You all right? For a moment there, Mama didn't open her eyes or say a word. Then she took a deep breath, opened her eyes to the heavens, and said, Thank you, Lord. That boy, he ain't dead. He ain't dead. You're not gonna come now, huh, Mama? I said. She put her hand on my shoulder. Nah, child, they coming all right. Your brother done hit himself a white boy. They gonna come. But the Lord, he done stepped in and give the breath of life back into Charlie Sims. He done gave it back. Now I know he gonna watch out after my Hammer, too. She took her hand away and hurried towards the house. David, you come with me. What you gonna do, Mama? I'm gonna cook me some molasses bread. I stopped. I was figuring Mama had gone crazy. Molasses bread? I said. That's right. I've been knowing that sheriff since he was a boy. So you come on now and you give me a hand. We gotta hurry. We got to hurry. I turned and looked at Tom B. and Joe McAllister. Both of them was looking puzzled as I was by the way Mama was acting. Miss Caroline, called Mr. Tom B. You want us to stay on here a while? No, sir, thank you. Y'all get y'all's water and get on. Best no full-grown men folks be standing up here when they get here. That'll just mean more trouble. Y'all get y'all's water and go on now. We'll be all right. I knows what I gotta do. David, hurry up, boy. We ain't got much time. She was running now. She ran onto the porch, not even looking back, just expecting me to follow. I glanced around again at Mr. Tom B. He was all frowned up, looking worried. He didn't give me a sign what to do, what to think, so I limped on across the yard and followed my Mama to the kitchen house. Hey, so My question is, why is Mama making molasses bread? A minute to think about it. So she's been knowing the sheriff for a long time. Why is she making molasses bread? The sheriff is coming, probably with intentions of taking Hammer in, because of what he did to a white boy. And how's Mama going to fix it? Sounds like she's working on it, and she's having David help her to work on it. So we will see you next time.